This is the story of Highfield Hall and Gardens, how it started and how it survived to become the landmark that it is today. Today, visitors are greeted by lovely grounds and a stately stick-style Victorian house the Beebe family called Highfield Hall. Who better to help us tell this story than the person whose vision made it all happen? Here is Highfield Hall.
At last, an elevated view of the Sound. I can see the islands clearly. Beautiful gardens will soon grace this highland. Wonderful shade-making trees behind. I trust my sons will keep those intact. What a refreshing breeze. I hope this will be a happy home away from home for Esther, my steadfast wife and mother of my 7 children, starting with Emily, born in 1836, to our last, Franklin, born 1853. We love our children, Emily, Mary Louisa, Charles, Francis, E. Pearson, J. Arthur, and Franklin. Esther Elizabeth Brown Beebe, my wife, was born and raised in Pittsfield. She agreed with me to have Pearson engage our capable architect friend, Carl Femmer, to work up drawings for a new summer home on land I purchased a few years before my illness.
The summer home of James Madison Beebe's widow Esther and sons E. Pearson and Frank and daughter Emily. In the second half of the 19th century, Cape Cod was changing. Gone were the days of sea captains and whaling as principal generators of wealth. Some wanted to introduce more industry to the Cape, including foundries and manufactories, while others looked to transform the region as a place for leisure and recreation. By the late 1860s, Cape Cod was being discovered as an escape from the crowds and stress of Boston and other cities.
This house is built at the very beginning of the period of money elsewhere being spent to create luxury and leisure on Cape Cod. Suddenly you've got railroads all across the country. So it's a time period in which wood is being shipped and hardware is being produced elsewhere. So it's part of an expansion of the American industrial economy.
The Beebe family arrived in Falmouth when the region was undergoing transformation and growth. Their arrival was soon met with the introduction of the railroad to Cape Cod. The railroad from Boston helped accelerate the growth. The Beebes were Episcopalians, and like many in the 19th century, religion was at the center of their lives. Their moral compass was guided by their commitment to family and community. Like many others, they supported a multitude of social welfare, educational, and religious endeavors. As devoted Episcopalians, they knew what it felt like to introduce a different worship tradition in Falmouth. And the Beebe sons and daughters built the beautiful, sprawling St. Barnabas Parish here in town. The family established themselves on Shore Street, purchasing land for a farm that stretched from Vineyard Sound to town. Soon land on this hill was acquired. While Boston was about business, Falmouth was about leisure for the family.
I worked diligently and focused on building businesses in Boston, cultivating connections associated with industry, textile, banking, and real estate, all for the good of the city. While here in Falmouth, my wife and children are diligently building a bucolic oasis, all the while laying a foundation of good for the community here. Esther and Pearson have ventured forth, acquiring hundreds of acres to add to the original 80 acres I acquired in 1870. I know it was done to support their flourishing interest in the rustic. This land supports the projects that bring happiness to my family by yielding a constant harvest of trees, flowers, and food, and building a healthy home and community.
Unfortunately, the Beebe family part of the story comes to an end. The last Beebe to live at Highfield Hall, Frank, passed away in 1932. Following Frank's death, the dissolution of Highfield Hall, Tanglewood, and land was underway. The subsequent decades would see twists and turns for Highfield.
My last son, Franklin, passed away in 1932. settling the Falmouth estate took many hands. Fortunately, when alive, both Pearson and Franklin built homes for a couple of their most dedicated and responsible staff, their gardener and the chauffeur. While it took a few years to sell the property, let's not forget there was a Great Depression happening. There were folks like businessman E.H. Bristol who could purchase a property as vast as this. In 1936, Bristol did acquire it, and with his plans to make Highfield into a sanitarium, or today known as wellness resort. Already a summer resident of Falmouth Heights, he knew the site offered many natural benefits: fresh air, ocean swimming, and land to explore. My family and others familiar with Falmouth knew this location offered the perfect environment for wellness and rejuvenation. Quite a contrast to the loud, dense, and dirty cities filled with people going this way and that. Highfield, under Bristol's management, attracted people looking to be rejuvenated, in search of the fountain of youth. Regardless of them finding it, it was certainly a respite from city life. One chink in Bristol's chain was Helen Gertrude Randall, a woman posing to be something she wasn't. Her sort of questionable character might take a false name and background and pose as she did as a much younger woman, offering youth and beauty diets to the unsuspecting guests. However, she can be viewed as an example of the modern woman, too. Many women were moving out of their family homes to manifest their dreams of independence. Some were rule breakers, some had good luck, some not so good. She may have gone a bit too far. Sadly, Bristol's association with the scandal did not help his venture. Alas, 1930s Cape Cod was not immune to the difficulties of dubious business practices or an economic decline.
Individuals with different ideas invested in the property. The dream of the next owner was fascinating. J. Elwin Wright wanted to build a Christian retreat in Falmouth. He offered lodging and fellowship at Highfield Hall and Tanglewood, the houses the Beebe sons built. Today, Wright is known as the first broadcast evangelist, which drew from his work with the Ministry of New England Fellowship of Evangelicals. Nowadays, most people have heard of Billy Graham. He was once associated with the same fellowship as Wright. It was Wright's dream to create a haven in the Beebe home, but it was not meant to be. Wright burned all the furnishings from the original Beebe home. We don't really know why. He lasted only one season. In 1946, Wright sold the property.
World War II finally ended. People were jubilant for peacetime. The New York theater man Arthur J. Beckard purchased the entire property, including Tanglewood, and had a dream of turning this property into a theater that would attract people from all walks of life. He had the connections to make his dream come true. Arthur turned the Highfield stables into a theater, and if you look closely today, you will see the outline of the original stable doors as you walk into the theater. Arthur began his summer stock in as a reality, inviting professional actors to Highfield for the summer. He was making his dream a reality. Beckard advertised the two houses, Highfield and Tanglewood, as hotels, while converting Highfield's Barnhorse stables into a theater. He would venture to bring first-class summer theater to Falmouth.
After surviving a Great Depression, a World War, and multiple owners, a renaissance of sorts was in the cards for Highfield Hall. Highfield's next owner, Arthur Beckard, was a theatrical entrepreneur who turned the stables and carriage house into a theater. But he did not have the resources to maintain the property. Coincidentally, the next owner knew Beckard from New York and the theater.
Unfortunately for Arthur, his pocketbook could not support his dream, and he needed to sell the property to his wealthy friends from New York, DeWitt McLaughlin Terhune, and his wife, Claire Harding Springs Weber. They were a happy and sociable couple, very much suited to one another. Their interests in the Metropolitan Opera, Broadway, fine art, and music formed the roadmap of their time lived on the Hill. DeWitt, from Texas originally, studied art at the Sorbonne before graduating from Rice. Following a divorce, he moved to New York City and met his second wife, Claire. They lived a very lavish life in New York. They purchased the property in 1949-50 with a dream to turn it into a center for the performing arts. DeWitt had two sons, Harrison and Phelps, and daughter Patricia had many passions and talents in the fine arts. Patricia, who painted in the abstract style, had many friends whose names populate the who's who of modern art. I think people are surprised to learn that in 1951 she brought in art by Rauschenberg, Pollock, and others for an exhibition in the Art Barn.
DeWitt Terhune. He would be Highfield's new owner and purchased the property in 1949. DeWitt and his family graced the grounds and gave the property the kind of love and care it deserved. Their dream established a robust summer theater and arts program, which lasted over a decade. The Terhunes made many repairs to the houses and expanded the beautiful gardens. In 1960, the Terhunes hired the McCarthys to take care of the property and to assist with everything, including feeding the actors and bartending during the plays.
She's a very kind-hearted person, and she could really cook, and she made people feel very comfortable, and she was able to cook for that many people and for all of these students, and she just took a lot of pride in her gardening and her cooking. Even though my grandfather technically, yes, was hired as the caretaker, they are always mentioned as caretakers, and she did equally as much work as he did to take care of the area, and everybody always remembers both of them very fondly.
The Terhunes were dynamic in everything they did. The summer theater was active, with actors living on the second and third floor of Highfield, while musical soirees featured each evening on the first floor. DeWitt produced and stage managed several of the summer plays under the name of Cross-Wright Theater, eventually getting tired and negotiated a summer stock program with Oberlin College. They were well thought of by their staff, and descendants of theirs and their staff have visited the modern Highfield, much to my delight. They moved into this wonderful property and loved it as much as we did. They entertained, enjoyed life, walked through the woods my sons had painstakingly groomed. I looked upon fondly of the Terhune family, as they loved Highfield as much as we had, and they cared for it deeply. They moved into the house when it had roof problems, and as they tried to temper the damage by building a false facade, which coincidentally mimicked a classical revival home, I was not fond of that, sometimes referred to as plantation-style facade they created, but they did renovate much of the home, and the kitchen needed repair.
Sadly, DeWitt Terhune passes away in 1962.
It started as soon as the Terhune era ended with the death of DeWitt. The estate was purchased by a summer resident of the Moors and was considering a plan to build 500 houses. Imagine hundreds of acres waiting to be developed by the sea. It is a miracle that this house stands today. I know my children are grateful that even though the house and grounds suffered from neglect for decades, the fact that it still stands is a testament to the tenacity of many Falmouth people. But I'm jumping ahead too fast. Fearing the land to be developed in such a way, in 1972, a businessman known by name Josiah K. Lilly III and his wife, Josephine, purchased the 487 acres to save it. He parceled out 383 acres to give to the town, known today as Beebe Woods. Additionally, for the Falmouth Hospital, Falmouth Nursing Association, Sports Center, and more. Josephine Lilly had approached the Falmouth Artists Guild. She had specifically wanted Highfield Hall to be a center for the arts. The Artists Guild at that point was struggling and felt they could not financially commit to such a large property. Other groups were approached, and they regretfully declined on the same grounds as the Falmouth Artists Guild. After their decline, they approached the Cape Cod Conservatory. The conservatory received 26 acres and all the buildings that remained. This way, they had the head of the conservatory, Mr. Casper. He would gladly take the properties, but he did not do so much about caring for them. I was always happy to see music lessons and ballet occurring inside the house, but the building was falling into disrepair, and rather than maintaining the buildings, which required resources, they built a new building in 1975. Now, with no use for the houses, the argument to demolish the houses was well underway, because they no longer had any use for either Tanglewood or Highfield. The grounds were completely overgrown, and the fine details were obscured. Thankfully, people with great character and grit were not blind to the value lain hidden by years of neglect. In early 1977, the group Falmouth Friends of Highfield Incorporated began to address the condition of the building and proposed several uses for the building, and simply asked the conservatory for permission to do so. Finally, a group emerged in 1994 called Friends of Highfield, powered by a growing sense of doom that they must persist until finally they did. It was heartbreaking that in those years, between the architectural assessment, when all the mantels, wall sconces, tiles were still intact, now all the valuable decorative details were taken. A fateful meeting in March of 1994, led by Mary Lou Smith of the Falmouth Historical Commission, summoned all those with the dream to keep Highfield and the grounds alive and prospering. That marked the beginning of the trajectory Highfield Hall and Gardens is on today. I heard the words of all these volunteers to the cause, and I am blessed to say it was a dream come true.
I was at the first meeting in March 10th of 1994, when a group of, Kathy Twombly wrote a letter to the Falmouth Enterprise suggesting that come and meet with us at the town hall and let's talk about trying to save Highfield Hall. So, because I had gotten to know Kathy, I brought my camera to the meeting and videoed the first meeting, which was really exciting and entertaining, and the key players who became involved in the project were there and spoke passionately about their love for the building.
There is drama and profound thankfulness that the house wasn't torn down, especially today when everything is at risk of being demolished.
Here we are, there's a Cape Cod Conservatory of Music and Art. It's a big organization. They own it. And a bunch of rabble-rousers, which is all that we were, got together. And what gives us the right to suggest what they might be allowed to do with their building? But somehow we were undaunted, and here we are right now talking about it.
I never would have imagined it possible that so much of what is beautiful, appropriate, and to some degree humble would be at such risk today. As I watch the changes in my lovely Highfield Hall, I am reminded that for all the inhabitants, this home has always been a house of dreams.
Preservation is not about buildings, it's about lives. According to Richard Moe, former president of the National Trust for Historic Preservation. His message continues. It's about saving historic places, not just as isolated bits of architecture and landscape, not just as lifeless monuments, but as environments where we can connect with the lives of the generations that come before us, places where we can build and maintain safe, rich, meaningful lives for ourselves and the generations that will come after us.